Alright guys, this is Connor Land 2014-15 WHAP review for period 1. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit, guys. I've got a couple of things going against me here. Number one, the program I normally use for this is not working, so I'm having to go kind of old school with it, so you're not getting this beautiful face on it, you're just getting the voice. And number two, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so just bear with me as we go, and I'll get this done as quickly as I can. So, if you hadn't figured it out already, this class is driven by what are called the key concepts. We're going to start with key concept 1.1, which deals with big geography and the peopling of the earth. Now, hopefully you'll remember from our discussion in class, but I talked about how I had taken the concepts and everything from the curriculum framework from the College Board, and I turned it into a series of questions and answers. And that's what we're going to start with. So the first question under key concept 1.1 is, in what ways did hunting-foraging bands of humans adapt their technology and cultures to new climatic regions? Now, obviously, I don't have all the words on this slide. You're going to have to bear with me. I kind of had to shorten some stuff up. But the answer to that, or the first answer to that, is that humans used fire in new ways. So what were they? How did they use fire once they discovered it? And the answers are pretty simple. Number one, they used it to aid in hunting and foraging. In other words, to help them find food. Number two, they used it to protect against predators, any animals that might come in and take them out. And number three, to adapt to cold environments. The second answer to the question about how early humans adapted to their environment is that they developed a wider range of tools specifically adapted to their environment. In other words, they invented things that made their lives easier. Things like to help with hunting, to help with processing food, and to help with protection. An example of that would be some of the artifacts, spear points, whatever you want to call them at the bottom here, but it's something that makes the process easier, or makes it easier to live. The next answer is hunter-foraging bands exchanged people, ideas, and goods. In other words, you start to see kind of the seeds of the interactions that define human nature going forward. So the first question would be, why were these things exchanged? And it's basically to help with survival at this point. If someone knows how to find food better, or to preserve food or anything like that and help people live longer, you're probably going to adapt to that idea. As far as what kinds of ideas were exchanged, look, you don't have to know any specifics, because I don't know that we know any specifics, but it kind of boils down to the social, political, and religious ideas of this time period, and the fact that they were sharing these things back and forth. So that was a brief overview of key concept 1.1. Now we move on to 1.2 and start really getting in the information that you need to know, because this deals with the Neolithic revolution and early agricultural societies. The first question, and probably the most important under this key concept, is what were the changes that occurred because of the Neolithic revolution? Now, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you know what this is, since you've seen it on your summer assignment and we handled it in class, so I'm not going to waste any time with it. But as far as the answers to that question go, with the changes, number one and first and foremost are the establishment of permanent agricultural villages, particularly the ones known as Jericho, which is located in the modern-day Middle East, and then Katahoyuk, which was located in the modern-day country of Turkey. Also at this time, pastoralism begins to develop in the grasslands of Afro-Eurasia. Now, as far as what pastoralism is, we talked about it in class, but it's a subsistence form of agriculture where society relies on its animals. And you can't underestimate how reliant these people were on the animals. From their everyday needs to the food that they got to the clothes that they wore, everything revolved around the animals. So no agriculture with these people. Everything that they have, or everything they can produce, comes from their animals. The reason people were able to settle in these agricultural communities is because they developed the ability to domesticate crops and animals. And all that means is being able to use it for human purposes without having to hunt it down. So you're able to settle and raise these things in one place. You need to know some examples of these crops and animals. As far as the crops go, we're mainly talking about cereal grains at this time, like wheat, like barley, like millet, and other things like that. And also maize when you talk about North and South America. So far as some of the animals go, you've got goats, sheep, lovely llamas like you see here on the right, and things like that. The next change that occurs because of the Neolithic or agricultural revolution is that agricultural communities had to work cooperatively to clear land and create the water control systems essential for crop production. Look, it's a very simple thing, guys. If you're going to grow crops, you've got to have land to do it, and these crops have got to get water. So to do that, you've got to have some kind of interaction with the environment and begin to change it. And the ways that they did this, first of all, as far as clearing land, they used a form of agriculture known as slash and burn, which is exactly what it says, and you can see a picture of over here on the left. If you need land and there's trees there, you cut the trees down, you slash them down, then you burn what's left, and you use the resulting ashes from it to fertilize your crops. Now, The benefit of that is, at first, the fertilizer gives you better yields or more production on your crops, but over time, as the nutrients begin to disappear in the land, you see less and less yields. So what you have to do is repeat the process somewhere else and continue to slash and burn. So it's not a very efficient way to do farming, but it was the way that they went about it back then. As far as keeping water on your crops and making sure that they grew, you had to come up with some kind of water control system, and the way that they developed was irrigation. Now, what you see on the right is a modern day irrigation rig like you see on farms around here. But back then we were doing things like digging ditches or other ways to try to shape the environment to get water to the crops. Another change that occurs because of the Neolithic Revolution, and it really ties into the last thing we talked about there, is that these communities had an incredible impact on the environment, and it's because of the things we just looked at. When you're slashing and burning, when you're irrigating, you are having an impact and you're changing the environment. So the question will be how? Well, it's from the clearing of the land through slash and burn agriculture. It's diverting water supplies from irrigation methods, and also it's the grazing of animals, particularly in pastoral societies, that lead to impacts and degradations on the environment. All right, we made it up to question 2 under key concept 1.2, and it is, in what ways did agriculture and pastoralism transform human society? So we've already looked at what changed overall because of agriculture and things like that. Now we're going to look at what it actually did to people. And the first thing is, it led to pastoralism and agriculture, led to a more reliable and abundant food supply, which makes your population shoot up for a couple of reasons. Number one, people live longer. It's very simple, guys. If you've got better and more reliable food, you're going to live a longer life. Number two, if you live a longer life, it's going to lead to more children because people weren't dying as young. And tying into these children, they lived longer themselves because they had a better shot of making it out of childhood. Next, the surplus food led to specialization of labor, new classes of artisans and warriors, and development of elites. Now, it's kind of an overall answer to it, but you need to know what a couple of these things are. And the first is specialization of labor, and that just simply means having a job that doesn't have to do with agriculture or food production. The second part would be, how can specialization of labor lead to elites? Well, what happens is people begin to use their talents. They don't have to devote all their time to food production. So you can become an artisan, you can become a merchant, you can become tied into religion in some way, shape, or form. And in some of these jobs, it leads to more money because of the demand for the thing that you do. So you accumulate more wealth, and with that comes prestige. The next thing that changed with regard to human societies is that technological innovations led to improvements in agricultural production, trade, and transportation. So the question would be, how can each of the following things improve the things mentioned above? How can they improve agricultural production? How can they improve trade? And how can they improve transportation? So these will fit into one or more categories, and you need to kind of label that as we go. So the first thing we got is pottery, and the big advantage of pottery as a technological innovation is the fact that you can now more safely store food. So you've got an easier way, I guess you could say, for food not to go bad. This is going to tie into agricultural production, in my view, because crops can be stored for longer, and also into trade because it's easier to transport goods if they're self-contained. Next, we've got plows, which you see an example on the bottom right here of an early plow. And what a plow does is it allows you to expose more nutrients in the soil because you can dig deeper. So that is going to tie into agricultural production. Next, you have woven textiles, which will tie into trade. It's just better clothes that last longer and provide more protection. Next is metallurgy, which ties into trade as well, and transportation. That's the ability to shape and form metals for some kind of human use. And then wheels and wheeled vehicles, which obviously will tie into transportation, with it making it easier to get from one place to another. The next step in the transformation of human societies is the accumulation of wealth created hierarchical social structures and promoted patriarchy. You need to know what both of these things are, hierarchical social structures and patriarchy. So the question would be, how can wealth that comes about in an settled agricultural community create different levels of society? And I've kind of alluded to this already, but the accumulation of wealth equals haves and have-nots. And that comes to the amount of wealth and also the amount of items that people have, material things that people have, as far as what are called luxury or prestige items. So that wrapped up key concept 1.2, and we roll on to 1.3. See, guys, it's not bad so far, but in all honesty, this is the shortest one we're going to do all year, so enjoy it while you can. Key concept 1.3 deals with the development and interactions of early society. So what we're dealing with here are the core and foundational societies, or the river valley civilizations, if you want to look at it like that. Now, as far as all the components of it, you've got the sprite charts. We worked on it, so know the components of it. You also, on top of that, need to know where they were located, and you did the maps on your summer assignment, so you should have that. But the ones that you need to be aware of are Mesopotamia, and I'm just going to kind of circle on this map generally where they're at since it's tiny. But Mesopotamia over here, Egypt in the northern part of Africa, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in India and Pakistan, Shang Dynasty in China, the Olmec Society in Mesoamerica or Central America, and the Chavin Society. See, Gage, it is a real place in South America. So in these last couple slides, I veered off from the question format of it, and it's quite simply because I could not come up with questions for it. So they're more statements, and for number 2 under Key Concept 1.3, you need to know that the first states begin to emerge during this time. And for our purposes, when I say a state, I'm not talking about Tennessee or Kentucky. I'm talking about what we kind of now consider a nation, a territory which is considered an organized political community. So when I talk about states in the context of this class, I can be talking about anything, so just keep that in mind. The next question would be the rulers, and as far as their source of power goes, it's all going to be tied into religion, and that's because in a lot of these places the ruler was seen as divine, and in some cases godly himself. So keep that in mind. There's a very close tie-in between religion and political power during this time. Back to the questions about these civilizations. Why were these states able to undertake territorial expansion and conquer surrounding areas? In other words, why were they able to expand during this time? Well, it's for a couple reasons. Number one, they might have greater access to natural resources and be able to make better weapons, which I think you all can figure out is going to help you out a lot when you're trying to conquer somebody. And the best example of that is the society or civilization of the Hittites and the iron that they were close to. So they were able to take iron, produce iron, through metallurgy and make weapons that were better than the people that they fought. Next is food production. Look, if you can produce a lot of food at this time, your population is obviously going to go up, which we talked about, which is going to lead to a stronger army because you have more people to choose from. And you can also, if you have a bigger population, be able to devote more people to being strictly in your army rather than doing something else and being part-time troops. Next thing you need to know with regards to these societies is that pastoralists developed, and remember, pastoralists are separate from these river valley civilizations that we're talking about, but they began to develop and spread new weapons and modes of transportation that transformed warfare and agricultural civilization. So they were the, if you want to call it this, the diffusers of this time. They took things from one place to another. They spread this stuff amongst the civilizations that they were in contact with. So you need to be aware of a couple of examples of the weapons that were developed. And these are compound bows and iron weapons. Got a compound bow down here, which I'm just apparently moving the screen around, but a compound bow right here, which allows you to shoot arrows more accurately and over a greater distance. You also have iron weapons, which I alluded to in the last slide, which is stronger and more deadly than what came before. There were a couple, like I said, examples of new modes of transportation developed by these guys as well that came just from their society and the way that they lived. Horseback riding is the first example. I mean, when these pastoralist societies, from the time you were a child, you learned how to ride a horse. And once that technology, and yes, it is technology, makes its way to settled societies, they begin to use it for warfare. And also chariots as well. Topic number 3 under this key concept, in what ways did culture play a role in unifying states? The first answer to that is the development of what's called monumental architecture. And remember, we talked about this in class, but monumental architecture are large man-made structures that are identifiable with a culture. So we're talking about things like the Great Pyramid, you're talking about the ziggurats of Sumeria, you're talking about temples located all throughout these river valley civilizations. So be aware of what these things are and how they can tie a culture together, or they can tie a civilization together. Next is urban planning, which is just simply a way to organize the structure and defense of a city. In other words, it's how you lay the city out to be more efficient and work the best for you. Some examples of urban planning in the civilizations that we're looking at. Number 1, you have defensive walls, which the Great Wall would be the best example of this. Now realize the Great Wall did not look like this all these years ago, but it's the best picture I could come up with. But a wall is something simply for protection. Also, streets and roads. You have a map, I guess you could call it, or a drawing sketch of Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro is actually what it is. And it shows that they laid these cities out in what's called a grid-like pattern. And that is a way to organize and to keep your city running in the most efficient, orderly way possible. As far as road systems go, It's a way to transport both people and goods, so it helps as well with the structure and the defense of a city. And last but not least, sewage and water systems, most closely identified with Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Simply a way to cut down disease in your city and to make things more hygienic, I guess would be the best way to put it. Another way to unify culture is through systems of record keeping. Now, when I say record keeping in this class, I'm referring to writing. And it was developed, first of all, for accounting purposes to figure out how much food they had and later on how much they were trading back and forth with other people. The examples of record keeping or writing during this period, you have cuneiform, which is associated with the Sumerians, hieroglyphics with the Egyptians, and quipu, which is associated with the Andean South American tribes or civilization. Another way to unify a culture is the development of legal codes. Now, legal codes are important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a way for a leader to maintain control of his people. In other words, people will act the way that you tell them to act. And by having laws, people know the parameters and the limits that are on their the way that they act. On the flip side of that, it's also another way to keep, or it's a way to keep the leader accountable to society as well, because these laws were seen, especially during this time period, the laws were seen as coming from their gods. So if the leader broke any of these laws or, did not take care of them, then it was seen as him going against their gods. One similar characteristic of these codes during this time is that there were different punishments for different levels of society. And the best example of this is the Code of Hammurabi, which you looked at in class. Another unifying factor is religion, and you begin to see new religious beliefs develop during this time period. First of all, you have the Vedic religion, which was in the Indus Valley region and is kind of the predecessor or earliest form of what we will know as the Hindu religion. You begin to see Hebrew monotheism during this time, which is the Jewish religion as we know. And then Zoroastrianism, which was associated with Sumeria and Persia and things like that. As far as Zoroastrianism goes, I believe there's something on the next slide that further explains it. There we go. Now, I'm not going to put the characteristics of everything that we talk about this year up on the slides, but I'm pretty sure you're not that familiar with Zoroastrianism, so just for a brief moment, bear with me while I explain it. All right, first of all, the origins are in Persia. It's a monotheistic religion. The founder of it was a guy named Zoroaster in the 6th century BCE. Their god is Ahura Mazda, and the characteristics and things you might see associated with it are number 1, fire temples, number 2, free will, and number 3, good deeds and charity. So these were all components and characteristics of this religion. You also begin to see trade expand during this time, particularly amongst 4 places. Number 1 is Egypt and Nubia. Nubia, which we haven't talked about, is located down here south of Egypt. The reason Egypt was able to trade with them is because they could transport goods down the Nile River. So it was an easy access point. It was an easy way to get goods back and forth. Number 2 was Mesopotamia and the Indus. And that trade, what makes it kind of unique is that it dealt mainly with luxury goods because it wasn't an easy trip. It wasn't an easy way to get these goods from one place to another, so they had to be very valuable, which defined them as luxury. And last but not least, literature is a reflection of life in the afterlife, which it is in most cultures. To get an idea of the way life works, literature is a good way to look at it. And to get an idea of how these societies, or any society, looks at the afterlife, you can look at their writing. And the 3 main ones, which all of y'all have looked at least one of these in class, I believe. First, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is from Sumeria during this time period. Then you have the Rig Veda, which comes from the Indus Valley region. And then the Book of the Dead, which comes from Egypt. So be aware that literature can and will be a reflection of life in the afterlife. All right, guys, that wraps up the Period 1 review. Like I said, it's the shortest one we'll do all year, so enjoy it while you can. Remember that anything on here is fair game for your exam, as well as anything from your summer assignment or anything that we've done in class. Also remember to fill out the study guide as you watch this, because you will be turning this in on test day, and it's an easy way to get some points. So make sure you've got this thing filled out. But other than that, appreciate you listening, and good luck on the exam.